Welcome to the Public Technology Institute's Professional Development Series, a free monthly webinar series designed to connect local government IT professionals with the people, conversations, and ideas that matter most. PTI is the only national organization dedicated exclusively to supporting local government technology through consulting, education, and a peer-connected community. We help you lead smarter, grow faster, and stay ahead of what's next. In this month's episode, When the Lights Go Out, we will dive into how the cybersecurity environment has changed from prevention to resiliency and how to best prepare your organization for when a breach happens.
Welcome to the Public Technology Institute's Professional Development Series. Today's webinar is on cyber resiliency, and I have some very special guests with us today. I have Ryon Saenz from City of Alexandria, Virginia, and Jason Belford from City of Alexandria, Virginia. Ryon is a former CISO and current acting CIO, and Jason Belford, I believe you are the CISO at this point, correct?
I am.
Just want to make sure I get all that right.
Hmm.
And we're calling it cyber resiliency because it feels like there's just so many more facets to cybersecurity. I can remember back in the heady days when cybersecurity was your firewall settings and that was it, and everybody was happy after that. And now it is definitely a cultural element. It is something that transcends technology. It's awareness of your staff. It's awareness of your constituents. In public sector, it's this all-encompassing responsibility. So we're really looking at it through this lens of not just how we prevent, how we train, but how do we respond? How do we mitigate? How do we handle soft threats? So I want to thank you both for taking time out to be here today. And so with that, I want to kind of just start in with our first question here. And I think this is one that's on everybody's mind, is for the past 12 to 24 months, we've seen a lot of technology changes that have really influenced that culture that I'm talking about. We've seen the introduction of LLMs and agentic AI, and the way it was released is inverse to how we normally deal with things in government. Normally we get an enterprise platform, we launch it, we control it, we train people on it. In this case, this came out as a consumer product that people brought into the environment through different means. It was almost kind of an invasive species for a lot of places. And it has huge impacts. And it's not the only thing. I know AI is kind of sucking the oxygen out of the room on a lot of things, but I do think it's something that we need to talk about in terms of cyber resiliency. So Ryon, Jason, what are your thinking on this? What should we be looking at here?
Yeah, you want to start, Jason, or you want me to jump in?
Go ahead and start, and I'll jump in.
Okay, yeah, that's it's a great question, Darryl. And yeah, I think the audience can absolutely empathize with this challenge. You can't get out of a conversation where AI isn't an element to it, especially when you're talking about the the large language models, right? That are kind of, they're like assistants in your device, in your pocket. Quick, digestible access to information that you'd previously have to just search, and then scour through links and read things. And it's helping folks understand. It's kind of doing that more in a discussion base, right? When you're like, you'd be asking someone, except it's these LLMs, but it's also making sure that you're verifying that information, right? That what links is it reading from? What sources is it drawing its information from for accuracy, right? So I think, to your point, think about the framework that the NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology framework. Their principles are still apply, and that's really identify, detect, protect, respond, recover. But the most important one is govern, right? So how folks are using these technologies and for what purposes, right? What information are they putting into them? And making sure they're informed and educated, right? Which is still a part of continuous security awareness training with how to use technology. This is just a very transformational technology, but also for folks to understand, don't put, unless it's authorized and reviewed by ideally the ITS department of your organization. You should be very mindful on whether it's for personal or for work-related matters, what type of information you're putting into it, just like you would into a Google search, right? You wouldn't put your social security number in there, or maybe some highly sensitive internal documents, because that's the outside, right? And when you think about zero trust, it's basically, right, untrust and verify at all times. And where your organization and your environment is your source of truth. And I'll just say, from a security lens with these kinds of things, as folks need to understand, keeping the human in the loop is extremely important. AI is an accelerator. It is not a substitute for people in governance. And having that kind of discipline is still needed because ultimately, you need to protect your organization's data and understand how it's being used or otherwise. Because some of these LLMs, you need to be very careful with terms and conditions and what they're doing with that data on that side, right? So I think that the biggest commodity I feel these days is, aside from data as kind of, your key asset, your soil that you can continue to harvest raw information and decision making from, is trust, right? And how we use LLMs to influence decisions. Kind of getting your toes wet before just relying on them autonomously to make decisions on things is extremely important, and being transparent in how we're using that with our community who we're accountable to.
Got it. So Jason, from a cybersecurity perspective, are you doing anything different with the advent of this? Has it changed how you view your cybersecurity role, or is it modified how you kind of handle the organization's cybersecurity posture?
I love that a minute ago you called it an invasive species. I think that it's great, right? It's, and if you look at an invasive species, you can sometimes see how it can be beneficial, even though if it's invasive, how it can be beneficial. So I think we have to look at it from both. All right, here's this thing that's come in, and people want to put data in it. They want to use it because they've seen, maybe they've played with it at home. Back to the consumerization part of that. Maybe they used it at home and said, oh, I can save lots of time, and they want to put these documents in there. But on the other hand, we have the security part with saying, no, don't do this. Ryan did a good job of covering that. But so I'm looking at it saying, what can we allow and where can we allow it? Can we get licenses with certain things? Let's see how our data could be protected, and then kind of focus people that way. So if we have a license and we know the data is not being reused, but we still have to put guardrails. Years ago, I was in a college class and the professor got up there and said, garbage in, gospel out. And we all laughed, but it's true. Computers have always been looked at that way, and AI is not any different. As a matter of fact, it's probably escalating it because now it talks to the person versus putting something in and getting something. It's actually reassuring them. Oh, you're right. Here's the information you need, and it's completely made it up. So now we have a bigger problem with what's true, what's not true. On the other hand, it does save time, and it is good. And so I think that from a security point of view, we've got to balance all of that with how do we use it to either be more efficient, and in my groups, be more secure. Can we use this to find that needle in the haystack? I have 1 billion lines of code or lines of logs. How can I use AI to really narrow down? That's the anomaly I'm looking for. It's one little thing, it's one tiny little thing here. A human can't do it. We've relied on years tools that they're not as advanced as some of these models that we're seeing today. And these things can do them extremely quickly. So all of that, it's a good balancing act. We need our users to be able to do things. We want them to do it efficiently. We've got to secure it. But I think that if we don't embrace this and start using it, we're going to be left behind, because there's going to be those people who are using it that are going to far surpass us.
So along those lines, I mean, one of the big challenges with cybersecurity is that it's not like things get substituted out. The threats that were there 30 years ago, from some basic, port level penetration to the organization, firewall breach, all those things still happen. I mean, if you look at your logs, I'm sure you have tens of thousands of attempts a day against the perimeter, which is, hey, that was, the bad guys haven't said, hey, we're going to stop doing that. We're going to start doing this now. So you can not worry about, port security on the firewalls anymore. So since it's a new thing that's in addition to everything else, how are you seeing the threat landscape change because of that? In terms of, like, are you seeing more sophisticated attacks with classic kind of means, What I mean there is like, the basic like hammer in the
Mhm.
firewall. Are you seeing changes in that? And are you seeing changes in your capability to respond to it? Like you were just saying right now, having AI scour the like your log reports. Like I remember
Mhm.
those, and I mean they were just riddled with false reports. Well, they weren't false, but it wasn't something to be alarmed about. It was just normal behavior, but it's letting you know this is not part of your current rules. Um, I've seen things on anomaly detection, where it's basically able to kind of detect, something that isn't necessarily a signature for a malicious actor, but it's not something that happens normally in your network. But that's a big lift for a big organization like yours. So I just want to get a sense of like, are you seeing which side seems to be winning, red team or blue team in this thing?
Oh, it's a cat and mouse game, but ask me again next week when we have a different answer. Certainly we're seeing the attacks of old. Those have not given up. We're still seeing port scans. We're still seeing the same things that were going on. And for the organizations that never got the basics right, this is just going to get worse because what AI is doing is it's speeding up those things, and it's giving tools to the bad guys that they can do this in a lot faster, bigger, better, more sustainable for them ways. So um, whether it's something like Mythos, or all their competitors are going to come out with some certain things that can start looking at these vulnerabilities and get to an exploit much faster. So while we may have patching, we're going to have to get to much faster patching. So I think that's the change we're going to see. Is we may have been doing these things, we may be doing them well, but well's not good enough. We're going to have to get to going from a patching of maybe weeks and months to hours and days. So I think that's going to be a big change. Certainly, we see things that are more convincing when you can do things like deep fake video, deep fake audio, uh, rewriting phishing messages so they actually make sense and are a little bit more convincing. So we're seeing those things today. Back to what Ryan said a little earlier, with the good education and awareness, it kind of helps that last line. Some of our tools are keeping up, some of them are not because the stuff is changing so fast. Um, but the end user being that final point, we've got to make sure that they're well trained, and this is not their specialty. We're IT folks,
Right.
so we're trying to teach them to say, here are the bad things. They have their own specialties, and so now they have to kind of do our job on top of their job, which isn't fair to them. But this is what we need, especially as fast as things are moving, and especially with AI involved.
Yeah, and what you said earlier about this confirmation bias that comes with AI, that the consumer product is really trying to make people feel trusting with
Mhm.
AI, that it feels much more like a companion than an application. And so that's got to be tough to kind of break that, where you've got, an active application on one end that's trying to get them to feel comfortable and kind of deviate from the zero trust instead of looking at it like this is an algorithm representing an interest outside the organization. So I need to approach this with a zero trust mindset. Instead, it's like this thing is so cool and tells me I am so good looking and so smart all the time that why my CISO never tells me I'm good looking. My CISO never tells me I'm smart. They tell me that I click on things all the time. So it's kind of this psychological warfare now between, our security team and an application that's on a phone.
So I think you have a good idea there. I think I need to start telling our users how good looking they are. I may have problems with HR, but I think I can win them over.
As long
Um,
as you do it with everybody, as long as you're equitable on, I think you'll be just fine. But it's funny, but I think that there's a little ring of truth in there
there is.
because I have played with the different models out there, and the confirmation bias is real, and it's so subtle. They've done such a good job at
Mhm.
kind of just in the way it phrases things. To your point, like oh no, you're perfectly right. You catch it doing something wrong, and oh yeah, you caught me. Darn it, that's you are so smart. You caught me that you're misrepresenting information to you. But it doesn't make you feel threatened. It doesn't make you feel like you're in a bad place. It just kind of glosses it over and moves past.
Right.
Um, I've
Yeah.
So
given leaders
Uh,
the instruction: treat it like an intern that wants to please you all the time, and is willing to lie to you to get you to be happy.
you said something that really resonated too, Darryl, right? And I've really never thought about it like this, but basically what you just said is absolutely true where, right, they say, what is it, leaders, aren't defined by making the right decisions all the time, but they are, defined by having the courage to make a decision when no one else will. Now, with that, you got to be very aware of when you're surrounding yourself with yes people, which LLMs are. And that is a very slippery slope, right? So balancing that trust with the information you're giving and making sure it's not just necessarily what it thinks you want to hear. And the more you discuss with it, the more it understands about you, even how you write and kind of how you think and analyze things to tailor that to making sure it's just reinforcing what you believe the answer might be, but you're questioning it. And it only will reinforce you to go down that single road, which is limiting, right? Um, I'll say one of the big adjustments too that Jason touched on and you had mentioned is also right prevention. You were talking about firewalls, right? So again, going back to the principles, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, govern, is I'm seeing what I to your point with checking also that check the outputs of what you're receiving, and that untrust that's there is a shift in how organizations need to balance things, where it's going to be less about protecting and more about your resiliency, right? Because the velocity of adoption, and it's all distributed now, to your point, right, coming in through the users, um, where that kind of resiliency and needing to be resilient is super important for organizations. And what I'm they're offer service offerings through Fusion LP PTI, such as ransomware tabletops. We've conducted one recently internally for our organization. We're Jason, he's really led a charge to refresh our ARs, and we've been having a lot of education and awareness training on that stuff. And it's really because it's not if, it's when, and now when is becoming much sooner, right? Whether it's mythos and patching cadence and the cat and mouse game is just being prepared to respond and be able to recover, because that is a very real thing.
Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing that up because it really has, the environment has changed from prevent an incursion at all costs to simply be ready for the incursion because it's going to happen. And that's, I think, that shift from security to resiliency. It's the acknowledgement that we've kind of hit the event horizon on this, where we're not going back to a perimeter defense like it's a moat with a drawbridge and brick walls. It's we have very porous environments now, and that's beyond AI. I mean, this was, COVID kind of accelerated it, but now I haven't seen an organization yet that doesn't have a completely porous environment in terms of accessibility, where people want access everywhere under any condition. I mean, I'm sure you guys probably have the same restrictions in your Microsoft tenant of, international, that, you either have select countries you can't access it from, or you can only access it from here. I'm Do you guys, I used to get exception requests almost monthly that, hey, I'm traveling to China. I would like to have access to my email from there. And like, okay, are we going to do this? Like, can you not have your email for 2 weeks while you're there? Because, and you end up with this kind of death by exception. So to your point, you really just have to be able to absorb a hit because you're basically opening up to taking it at some point. Yeah. So that being said, this leads into another facet that, Ryan, I think I'd like to talk with you about is, since we're now talking about resiliency, we're talking about, how do we absorb a hit? One of the hits that we're seeing is we're seeing budgets start to tighten. I think that from COVID to now, we've seen this kind of, we had the federal funding that came through, and I'm sure you guys had an inordinate amount because you're in the Beltway and you're kind of in that zone of high risk. But now it's all dried up. And now we're starting to see the first headwinds where, I'm out here on the West Coast and kind of the municipalities that I'm involved in. We're getting the first wave of not necessarily dramatic cuts, but a lot of ask to stay at flat on budget. or to be prepared for that, 357, give me a scenario if I had to cut 3%, 5%, or 7%. Um, how should CIOs be looking at this budget restriction in terms of that cyber resiliency? What things do they fall back on and defend at all costs? What hills should you be willing to die on? What things do you just try to get in, but if you can't get it, then so be it. But what should people be focusing on as far as investment with cyber resiliency right now?
Yeah, I'll start and Jason walk back anything I say. But I'll say first is you need to kind of turn the lights on in your organization, understand what's in your house, right? What I mean by that is assets and inventory. What are the systems, right? Ultimately, it's data, but they're being housed by systems and used by your departments to deliver goods, services, or what have you. You need to understand what those are, what those services are to connect it to the business, to understand what the organizational impact is and the risk, right? So, for example, the risk of, say, our public website versus a smaller website that's, for a singular service, they might have the same kind of vulnerability, for example, but the risk is very different to the organization, right? So I think it's very important to have a good handle on visibility of your environment. And that could be through, your vulnerability scanning, which also informs you on patching and prioritization, right? I would say security awareness training because it's still about the people, kind of like what Jason mentioned. I mean, they are our strongest safeguard, and when they're well informed, but they're also still our greatest risk because the threatscape has remained similar as far as it's evolved from focusing on systems and trying to get in through people, right? So those are things cannot cut, right? Hold the line on those things and the identity, right? Your example of, hey, folks are traveling. For us, from a zero trust perspective, is really focusing on logical identity, right? It doesn't matter where you are, we do not trust you, and you need to have the same measures. We still want to be informed when folks are traveling internationally, but these, blocking countries and stuff, I mean, they could use VPNs to just look like they're right in your backyard and stuff and bypass that. So it's just measuring, making sure your safeguards and controls are providing the value that you're hoping. And then if you have, some limited dollars that, if you have to look further is for visibility, identity, and detection, constant monitoring, right? Like your security information event management systems and things like that. Like you said, right? When you get an anomaly, whether it's a known bad or this is something we should probably look at a little closer because it's not our baseline of how our environment typically sees things interacting with one another. And then also endpoint security and backups. You have to be able to recover, right? So those are probably the big five, I'd say. I kind of fire hose some at you there, but again, it's all about resiliency because they will get in. It's just a matter of can we recover from this?
Yeah, and on the backups, it's interesting because one of the things that I think is a kind of a quiet, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a gentle way of putting this, but a quiet misstep that a lot of people make is not testing backup recovery. That, it's kind of trusted that, well, we have our tapes and they're with an offsite storage and we'll be able to bring them back. But to actually exercise it and to have a plan and work the plan, to your point, like these tabletops are really, really high value investments. And I've seen them all the way. You and I participated in one that was just with the electeds. It was just at the highest level of the executive. And it was really to kind of inoculate them to this is what it's going to feel like when we go through this and figuring out who needs to be notified and in what order and where does confidentiality kick in. All the way down to testing your backups with your team. Like, can your help desk team do a restore on this? What level of expertise do you need in? So, I appreciate you bringing that out because I think we invest so much in applications and services, but really you have to use them the way that they're intended. And you have to train on using them. It's like a soldier that has all these weapon systems. If you don't train for using them in, under combat like situations, you're not going to be an effective soldier. And same here, that if you have all these, artifacts and applications out there, but nobody's training on them and nobody understands how they're going to work under less than ideal conditions, you're kind of inviting a double failure on it. You've got the breach, or you've got the whatever happened with your security environment, but now you've got the failure to respond correctly on it, and that's often worse than the actual breach. So,
Yeah. So,
Adding to that, I would say certainly testing your backups is absolutely necessary. But the other thing that I don't think we do as technologists, and this becomes a business issue, is determining how long it takes to restore those critical systems. Because if a lot of folks learn about IT because they watch their 1 hour serials, right? And if you're watching an NCIS and they can fix everything in an hour, everything must be able to be fixed in an hour. So
yeah.
getting that realistic time, how long is it going to take to recover that system? If we get into that issue where we're going to have to do a full recovery, are we talking hours, days, months? Because that's going to make their job of having to make decisions a little bit easier as well.
Right.
and you took the words right out of my mouth, Jason. I mean, that's the thing that you really get the value from those tabletop exercises is it can be a very simple, quick aha discussion moment. And folks will have a breakout from it when they realize it's not the way Hollywood seems. This is what our capability is. Whereas it's great to have faith and confidence from leadership, but the expectations may not be reality based on what the investments have allowed for recovery, right? Where it's not just a button and things are back up, and it's kind of understanding, are these things working and we can recover them and test them, to your point, Darryl. And I think that's where folks is there may be a gap in understanding of those expectations, and those kind of exercises can really bridge that and make them aware, because it changes the discussion from where are we, what are we doing, what have you done for us lately, kind of thing, to what do you need, right?
Right. No, that's such an important aspect of this is controlling expectations, because if you're not going to practice the fire drill, everybody's going to crowd the exit at once, and that noise becomes really difficult in a crisis. If every department expects complete restoration of services right now and none of them see the broader landscape, none of them understand the prioritization on it. The animal center's clamoring at you that they need to get their kitten adoption up right now because they need this. But you've got your email services that are still flat on your back. So I love the idea of using these exercises to give people realistic expectations on what will happen should we encounter this, and really kind of setting that expectation that, look, we're experiencing breaches in our cybersecurity posture all the time. Some of them we handle without you noticing, but there are going to be ones that you're going to notice, and we need your expectations to be in line so that we can take care of this in the order that it needs to be taken care of.
And just to bring it back, because you did ask about grants, and so we have a lot of our, I'm sure a lot of the folks that are watching this, you have a lot of your departments based on their services like public safety, health services, that rely on those grants. And that could be for technology. And it's kind of like the Cinderella, dynamic, as far as it can turn into a pumpkin. And then if you don't have a path to sustain that technology, over time, it gets old and becomes end of life. And not only does it start deteriorating and impacting that service, but the longer it's unmanaged, unsupported, and unpatched, the larger that risk profile grows, where it's not just impacting that service but your entire organization, right? So it's helping these decision makers, as part of facilitating these conversations, meeting their expectations, and understanding some decisions would need to be made, right? Whether do we stop doing this type of business or pause it, and or do we identify what's the opportunity cost to pull funds from other planned initiatives, right? And that's not an easy decision or discussion to have, but it's necessary.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also, you brought this up earlier about leveraging PTI services on this, because we're a nonprofit and we operate in that space. And I think a lot of organizations don't understand the resources that are available to them at the different tiers, because there are private sector partners that are invaluable. There are private sector partners that provide full network operations center, security operations center, full suite of security tools. But you've also got CISA that's still out there. And I know that there's been some kind of questioning on what CISA's role is with the administration change and some, but I've got a close friend at one of the counties here in San Bernardino or in California that used them to come in and do election testing. And they came in and said, "Hey, we'll do a complete pen test. We'll look at your whole environment." And he said they were wonderful to work with. They actually brought a team physically on site, flew out and walked them through. And he was just, he had no idea that it was going to be as white glove as they were. And I can't say that's going to be for everywhere, but I think having this awareness of the different tiers of resources that are available and how to use them effectively, to your point, so you don't get Cinderella, so you don't kind of, because and we've seen this where you go all in on one service and then suddenly your funding dries up for that, or that service becomes expensive, or something happens where you now have to look at something else. And I think that's a big part of this picture of resiliency, is understanding this kind of kaleidoscope landscape where it's just all these different fragments that are making up the picture, as opposed to just one thing that you have to worry about.
I think
Yeah,
one of the
that's go ahead, Jason.
Sorry, one of the things I think when we were talking a few minutes ago about if budgets have to be cut, what do you put up there? And Ryan did a great job of saying, here's all the things I'd keep. And I think the one thing that we hadn't discussed yet that I would absolutely put as a priority on that list is the cybersecurity talent and the IT talent. Because when you don't have the funds to go buy the tools, and you have to, and while you can use all the different tiers, you still have to have that expertise to put it all together. That's great. I can get a pen test, but if all I'm doing is getting a pen test and it sits on a shelf, it doesn't do me any good. I've got to have someone that's going to go back and fix those and analyze them and say, okay, they found this, or they found this, and so I really want to highlight that talent that we have, that has institutional knowledge, it has technical knowledge, leadership. That's really important to save in those budget cuts. I would much rather cut something else than start even talking about cutting the folks or salaries or empty positions.
Well, and that brings up we look. Oh, go ahead, Ryan.
I was just going to say, yeah, we look at people last. Thank you for bringing that up, Jason. And we also have gotten out of our mold in the past few years where in not just FTE positions, but how do we source these things to achieve these outcomes? And it's really, whether it's managed services, co-managed services, right? We're all lean and mean, but to your point, Darryl, there are partners. You don't have to do this on your own. Grants and federal funding, some of that with the current climate, the lines might be longer right now because there's less stretch for them, but they're still available to help. You do not need to do these things on your own. And even as we're growing our team, we're still not built to be 24/7, but it demands it. So we rely on partners to help us be force multipliers in that way too.
And so, Jason, you brought this up. So I'm going to offer the counter narrative that is out there right now. And that is, why are you investing in talent? AI can handle this. We're seeing thousands of positions being shed from private sector organizations that are saying, we don't need people. AI can handle this. I want to get your take on how much of that is hype. How much of that is an overreach on what it can do? How much of it is real? Because it's a very compelling voice. And I'm hearing, when I go out and speak with elected officials and senior officials who are not technology, that becomes part of the conversation is, well, can't we just use our AI to do that? Can't Claude handle that for us, or ChatGPT or Grok and just handle that for us? And so how are we countering that, or how are we responding to that?
So I think it goes back to our earlier conversation. AI makes mistakes. Let's start there. Human review is still going to be necessary. First of all, I'm not scared of Skynet taking over anytime soon and having to do the whole Terminator thing or the Matrix. I'm not worried about it anytime soon, especially with what I see AI doing. It's helpful, but it's not a replacement. I can certainly see where, especially with local government, where we have smaller teams, AI is going to be there to augment and help things move faster, but it certainly can't replace. I think there's going to be a big difference. It's going to be the teams who use it and the teams who don't. And you're going to find the teams who are implementing AI are going to move faster, better, more efficient, but it can't do it without the people.
So it's a tool for people. It's not a replacement for people. You're
Correct.
not seeing Skynet right now where it's basically just decommissioning us.
As many mistakes as I saw it trying to correct an email that I was writing, I'm not worried about Skynet anytime soon.
So Ryan, what's your take on that?
I'll just add to that is, in talking about just AI as a replacement, I kind of, my personal observation is just like when cloud first became a big draw, right? Oh, we can get out of this space, this physical space, and move it, make that someone else's responsibility. And folks, a lot of organizations were charging straight ahead into that model, only to find that it was way more costly, and many of them moved all the way back or found a healthy balance, knowing it's not just a silver solution, I'll say, right? And I feel like that's the same thing that we're seeing right now with this kind of, we can just tier out all these, these positions because they do either repetitive tasks or something else, but they're forgetting about the people element of it, which is these people need to start somewhere, and they develop because they are the ones who then can oversee and manage that AI. And they're basically just cutting off that pipeline for that development to make sure that oversight remains there and that knowledge force. And if they continue on that path, it'll be interesting to see in 5 to 10 years what the workforce looks like when the folks that have those competencies begin to retire or change positions. Who's going to do that, right? And that's a question I don't know if anyone's been asking as they've been doing that in the private sector.
Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma there because, to your point, Jason, AI is a great tool, a great companion tool to accelerate.
Yeah.
But part of the things it's accelerating is the friction points that teach us how to do things. That, I was talking to a friend about Python coding, that now, I mean, AI can just handle it in large chunks. But what he's seeing is that coders that are coming in kind of fresh out of college or new to it don't have the same skills and don't have the same problem solving kind of mechanisms that older coders do. That was brute force. Hey, you had to, run it through all these different iterations and try and figure out what line item in your code has errors and debug on your own. It's kind of like when you just start offloading. It's like getting a Jazzy. When you stop walking and just start taking a cart around, there's no need for your muscles to remember how to walk anymore. And so, is AI kind of becoming this Jazzy? Because one of the things I want to cover before we leave is I want to talk about, you said Skynet's not here in the near future, and someday I'm gonna have to talk to you offline about what near future means. Like, is this like, don't make plans for Labor Day? Like, what is near? But also, I really want us to talk about, like, from a cyber resiliency standpoint, what does the future look like for us? Like, when you're looking 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, at the next generation, it's going to take over from you two. What are they going to be stepping into that we either can see or can't see right now?
So I'm going to nerd out for just a second. I know when I took, I took C many years ago, and I had to deal with pointers and memory and all these things, and it was horrible. It was just absolutely horrible. So when I got to Java and it did the garbage cleanup and you didn't have to worry about memory pointers, it's like, this is great. Well, if I'd started there, I would have lost that whole part of my life of having to learn pointers. So I use that as an analogy, a nerdy analogy, to say things will change. Things will change. Just like most people, they're not teaching cursive in most schools anymore, right? It's a thing of the past. They're not teaching typing because you can now dictate. So things change, but the more they change, the more they stay the same. I have a 12-year-old who is coding. He's coding in Python. He's written a couple apps using Swift to put in the Apple App Store. He doesn't know how to code. He uses AI for all his code. But what I've been able to teach him is I've tried to teach him coding. That doesn't work well. what I have been able to teach him is at least the theories behind the code. So he understands what these things are. So he's actually doing a really good job of debugging when the AI gets it wrong. He's able to say, hey, it's doing this, but I think it really should do this. So he's getting a little bit of that engineering programming mindset without actually having to do the old school, oh, where is that error? This error is not very descriptive, so it could be anywhere in my code. And so I think that we're going to see more of that. I think there was a report I saw not too long ago that says within the next 5 years, 80% of all code will be written by AI. That's where it starts scaring me, is when, not that the AI is writing the code, but when AI realizes it needs to write the code and starts self-writing code. That's when you and I need to talk about the future of Skynet. But as far as going where we are, I think it's great that this thing can produce code. I ran some of my old code that I've written through for home through different AIs, and it does a much better job writing Python than I ever did. So I've adopted some of the code there and said, you know what, I'm not going to even try to maintain my code anymore. And I've got little scripts for doing all sorts of things, but it writes much better code than I do.
But the fact that you can identify that
Yeah.
you know the difference, like the fact that you can put a valuation on it, that speaks to your experience in it. And
Right.
so, it's when that's lost, when somebody doesn't know if it's good code or bad code, they just, I don't know, I don't do code,
We'll have another employment boom like for the year 2000 where we had to go find all the COBOL programmers again. We'll have that again in the future. Does anybody know what this code actually does?
Yeah, COBOL will never die. I believe that when Skynet is done, when everything is settled, there'll still be somebody out there maintaining COBOL somewhere. So yeah, that is a testament to resiliency. So Ryan, what are your thoughts on the future? I mean, you're CIO now. You're got to look out for the organization. What does this future look like for you?
Yeah, I'll say at least in the next couple years. I mentioned, I think resilience is going to really take over prevention for a lot of organizations. Not to, abandon it, right? It just might the weight of where you focus your efforts. I think that'll be super important. I think zero trust maturity will become a baseline. And what that means is, right, identity, verifying who is, people are who they say they are, like at least their digital persona in your organization, your device health, granular, access controls, things of that nature. And to your point, Darryl, right, more collaboration through, the ISACs out there, whether it's MS ISAC, the multi-state agencies offerings, and EI ISACs for election security, all of them. Those collaborations will become more and more critical for all of us. And then long term, I imagine seeing security is more of it's like an operational service, where it's going to shift from really to specialized providers, even with public sector experience, realizing this is going to be a growing need, and for all of us, right? We can't do it on our own. I think governance and accountability is going to be huge, right? Including making sure that there's representation, so these solutions are being governed. They're accounting for whether it's bias, equity, and any of those considerations, and being transparent with how they're being developed, they're maintained, retrained, making sure they're accurate, and it's not inadvertently creating any disenfranchised populations if it's going to be more in line with making decisions without humans in the loop if organizations decide to go that way. And I think there's going to be a bigger need. I see it already for integrated cyber, physical protections, right? As more infrastructure becomes connected, right? Think about the facilities we're all in today, all your IoT devices, right? And those access to those things. We've been seeing attacks over the years to things such as the Colonial Pipeline. Like, these are critical resources just for the sake of not really just for livelihood, right? When you're talking about utilities, I think that is going to be a big theme that will only continue to grow, and it'll be more of the cat and mouse game along the way. But really, to what Jason said earlier, I'll say the biggest thing for organizations is culture. And it really starts there, and it starts with having those discussions we're talking about through some of these, whether it's a tabletop or just these kind of forums, with representatives throughout your organization, whether it's, obviously leadership, and it starts there with what they demonstrate, and throughout the organization. But that culture is super important, but they need to be aware and informed of where things really are. And we need to be honest with ourselves, where it's like, yep, we're doing great, we're doing these things. And we should not be saying that. We need to be able to have honest conversations, because if you're not having those conversations, you are owning and accountable for that risk. So it's best to open that up, put that in front of your leadership to make that a business decision. And that's where that accountability shifts. So then when something does occur, right, it can't be a lack of awareness, and it's more focusing on trying to recover rather than trying to work over, around, or through those known risks yourselves.
Yeah, and I think that's a great closing statement on this, because our mission at PTI is to give technology leaders the tools and the confidence to have a strong and trusted voice in their organization. And I do think that is going to be the centerpiece for IT. To your point, the things that are unsaid that become the liabilities you own exclusively. And so it's developing the skills, developing the confidence to go out there and speak these things truthfully without it being dramatic, without saying it's Skynet. It doesn't have to be a Chicken Little statement. It just has to be an honest one about what the risk is, and the reasonable things we can do to mitigate and build resiliency around that risk. So I want to thank you both for taking time out today. I know you're incredibly busy. You've got things going on, but I so appreciate everything you've done for PTI, Ryon. You've been incredibly active with us. But I really want to thank you specifically for taking time out today, because I think this is such an important topic. And this hopefully will start conversations around the country about how people are managing that cultural shift from cybersecurity as a defensive perimeter to a cultural shift where we just have to have everybody in a mindset of resilience. So thank you both. I appreciate being here today.
All right, thank you. All we have is each other.
All right. Take care, guys.
Thanks for watching. To explore all of PTI's learning opportunities and resources, visit us at pti.org. And be sure to check out our Public Tech Job Board, a resource exclusively dedicated to connecting quality IT candidates with public sector organizations by scanning the QR code. Tune in to next month's webinar, where Adam Frumkin, the CIO of Franklin County, Ohio, will cover the trends he's seen in government IT this year and which trends to watch out for in the coming months. July webinar will be released on Tuesday, July 28th.